order. And Ms. Morlock, would you please do the roll call?
Yes, ma'am. Member Metzger,
Present.
Member Thompson,
Had to get my mouse in the right spot. Sorry, yes, I'm here.
okay, thank you. Member Erickson,
Yes.
Member Woolrab, Member Barnett,
Present.
Member Friedrich,
Present.
Member Lehman.
Present.
You have all members accounted for.
Perfect. Welcome. So good to have everyone together. We don't have any approval of minutes. Do we have any appearance by the public or a county employee?
We do not.
Very good. So we have departmental matters. And so that would be for A1, items to be presented for action, request approval of the amended McLean County Board Resolution establishing budget policy for fiscal year 2022. May I have a motion to put that on the floor? Member Barnett made the motion. May I have a second, please? And Member Lehman has a second. So we'll let Ms. Rodriguez have the floor. And if you want to pass it on, I know you have people who did a significant amount of work on this. And if it's okay with the committee, as you have questions about a particular area, let's address those questions at that time as opposed to holding them, because I think that generally it may generate additional questions. So if we can manage the meeting in that way, I think it would be most effective. All right, very good, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Metzger. And I'll be brief. I know that we are here because you gave us the grace to approve the budget policy document as it was at Finance Committee last month. And that was at our urgency of keeping the timeline going forward, because we've already actually, for example, met with the department heads to set the table for the budget process. But we are back with inside your packet, you will note some red line changes. We feel they reflected what you recommended at the Finance Committee meeting. And that is why we are here today. And so I can pass it off to Assistant County Administrators Taylor and Dreyer. They did the bulk of the work on this. This is their expertise area, and can answer questions. I don't know if they want to provide any opening statements, but certainly for concerning time and just really to be able to entertain what questions your committee might have, Chairman Metzger, perhaps we should start that way. I think that might be best. So if we may, I'll turn it back over to you, Chairman, and we'll go from there.
All right, I personally would like a little bit of an overview from either Ms. Dreyer or Ms. Taylor of the information that was provided on pages 3 through, looks like 8, 3 through 7. So if you can help set the stage, and then as we have questions on those particular pages, we'll ask them accordingly. All right? Is that a good direction? Okay.
I got it. So as at the last meeting, it was requested of us to put together some information regarding how the county tax rate has changed over the years, how the county tax levy and the county budget have progressed along with the rate setting EAV over the last 10 years. So this first graph shows that the rate setting EAV for the county has increased 12.75%, while the county tax rate has basically stayed the same, decreased slightly. But the levy, cause it's proportionate to the change in the EAV, has increased 12.4%. And then the county budget has increased 35.57% over the last 10 years. So this information is for the entire county budget. And then on page 4, this graph or this chart shows how the general fund tax rate has fluctuated over the years. And there's the maximum, it can be a 0.25. So over the years, it has decreased 0.14%, but we're right at that 0.25 maximum. And then the general fund levy, that is proportionate to the change in the EAV. And then the unencumbered fund balance was inquired. So it started out in 2011 at 12 million, and it's at one point it was down to 10, but currently it's up to 11.2 million. And then the last column shows the percentage that is of the county budget, which the budget policy did say 15%, and currently we're at 10.7%. And then on page 5, that chart shows the revenues throughout for the last 10 years. And it shows the general fund fee revenue. This is just for fees. And compares it to the total revenue for the general fund. Oh, sorry. I didn't prepare those. The last 2 pages, one thing we were asked to look at is how the fees have changed in parks and recreation. And these last few pages show the increases for the various activities out at the park.
One thing that I noted when we were looking at, if I may add to that.
Oh, please.
One thing that I noted when looking through those graphs is that our fees in the Department of Parks and Rec have been very modest, and I think that is in keeping with making it accessible to all of our citizens. But I would also note that in your graph for boat fees, the pontoon boats were just added in 2020, and so they're showing no increases, but they have been a resource and a source of financial, what's the word I'm looking for? A financial benefit to the county with those efforts. And so I think that is trending in the right direction. And our department head, Mike Steffa, has a good pulse on what the people who use the park are interested in those efforts. So wanted to make a note of that.
I do have maybe a comment or a question. And this, I know you can't answer, and I'm sorry, Member Barnett, go right ahead, and I can ask this at some other point. It's not that important, so please.
Well, I just had a quick question. The total general fund fee revenue that's there. So those are all the fees that we collect across everything within the county, right?
For the departments in the general fund.
Yeah. And it doesn't get like split up at all. It just goes into like one fund. We don't split it out more than that. Okay.
And those fees then would be from recording, from the county clerk's office, and the circuit clerk. Does that fall in there then too?
Yes.
Did I miss any?
Animal control.
Oh, okay, very good. Thank you. My question really had more to, my question related to the park. And again, I don't expect anybody to have that answer, but it appears to me, as I look at this, we have very modest fees. And as Ms. Taylor indicated, that we're trying to keep those so it's accessible. However, the things that are profiting the most are the most expensive things, which is interesting, to say the least. So we can make, generate better revenue and help offset some of the cost of the park, um, and potentially do some improvements. And I don't mean maintenance, maybe more than improvements to the park. Just as I went running, the number of trees that are down that haven't been removed. I mean, things like that would be, and tree removal is enormous expense, huge expense, even in when you have it in your home at your home, and then if you have that in the middle of a forest like environment, it's even worse. Um, so I found that interesting that the revenue has increase for the most expensive things. So, um, talking about fees then, um, have you as a group in the administrator's office had discussions, or have the department heads had discussions about increasing fees?
Well, recently, Mr. Steffa came to the property committee and increased fees at the park for 21.
And what about maybe the recorder of deeds or the um, services that are provided through the county clerk's office? Has there been any discussion in any of those? And the health department, they have their own stuff, so that kind of falls in its own. So, and I know they're continually addressing those, but those other department heads, there has been no discussion with them, or have they brought that to anyone?
The county clerk has brought that discussion to the attention of county administration, and um, it is our understanding that a fee study likely needs to be conducted, and I would need um, to reference, I don't know if it's state statute or county code, but we were researching that for Ms. Michael, and I know Ms. Vasquez has turned on her microphone. Um, we wanted to support our county clerk in obtaining the information she needs to perhaps increase fees to keep in line with even other county clerks and what they charge for similar services. But we also knew that there's a process that has to be completed, and that it couldn't be done just solely by making a couple of phone calls, that perhaps a consultant needed to be um, retained to gather that evidence. And so I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot, Ms. Vasquez, to talk about that, but you and I had gone back and forth a little in helping Ms. Michael understand that a fee study might need to be done first.
Exactly. So I have been in contact with in communication with Miss Michael, and she has expressed a desire to increase her fees across the board. Each of her fees are authorized by statute, and so part of my help and assistance to her is to go through each of those statutes to see how much they could be increased, and whether such an increase of what she wants would require a fee study or simple board vote or something like that. So we're in the process of going through these. We've already talked about one particular fee, which I think at the moment is $30 for individuals, and the request that we're exploring up to increase it to $75. So that is a statutory allowed. That's allowed by statute. Um, and so when we get to that point, when we're ready to present it to you, we will have each of those fees, what they are now, what the request is, and if there's anything additional that the statute requires of us. For example, the fee study, which the fee study is a study of what it costs us to perform the service and what we are charging for that service, and if that matches up. But usually that's only in circumstances where the fee increase is the request to increase the fee is higher than what is allowed by statute, so above the $75, for example. So yes, we are talking about that in depth.
And how do those increase in fees impact the budget for this year?
Well, at the moment, nothing has been increased. And just like each of those fees are statutorily authorized, sometimes a portion of those fees have to go to special funds. Um, for example, in a marriage license fee, there is a $5 portion of that that must go to a special fund, so it wouldn't necessarily go to the county. So we'd have to look and see what overall, how it would increase our budget if it did.
And that would increase revenue is what we're talking about then.
Correct.
Member Erickson and then Member Woolrab.
My question might be out of order, so I'll save it for later here if you want me to. But I did ask Mr. Everhart to be on here, and I did discuss with him if there were any funding to come through, federal funding through the American Rescue Plan Act 2021, which might be available to the Law and Justice Center to upgrade their electronic filing system. And do we know that yet?
Do we want to go into that whole, not just Mr. Everhart, but the entire piece of that? Or do we want to address just that? And I think Member Woolrab, you kind of were involved in a little of that, so you want to share a little bit of information with us?
Well, what I really wanted to make a comment about the park fees for just a moment, if I could go, we could go back to that. If you
Yeah,
don't mind.
let's go there because
And-
I think your question, as you identified, is a bit larger. So yes, please go ahead, Ms.
So,
Woolrab.
I can understand that we may want to increase certain fees if they haven't been increased and they don't, and they're comparably low to other parks. But I'm wondering, some places that you visit, county parks, I think they typically are, will charge additional for out of county or out of state, in some cases, residents. And I wondered if we had ever looked at that option, because after all, the taxpayers of McLean County have already paid taxes in essence to at least partially fund something like our park. So if we have people, and I don't know that we do, coming from, I would assume some from Woodford County minimally, and possibly even out of state for campers and that kind of in the camping camper site area, maybe we could raise some fees there. I don't know how difficult it would be to then check for that, but it's another option I think we have. And I have a broader question maybe for you, Kathy, if I could, about some of this data. Since the overall county budget has increased over these years that and let me say thank you so much for pulling this amount of information together, because it's very, very helpful. Since the overall budget has increased over the years, but we see that the unencumbered fund balance has decreased percentage-wise over those same years, I would think then someplace in the county budget has then proportionally increased. Some areas of the county budget must have proportionally increased since we have an overall increase. As if that's making sense. I'm wondering if you have a sense, I know you wouldn't have specifics, maybe a lot of them, but if you have a sense for where the increases would then have gone to.
Do you mean what portions of the budget?
Yeah, what portions
increases?
of the budget have seen increases since the unencumbered fund balance has decreased, but the overall budget has increased?
Well, the unencumbered fund balance, these are as of the end of the years. So they could have decreased because revenues were not as much as projected. Um, maybe expenses were more than expected by the end of the year. So that would have decreased the fund balance. But this unencumbered fund, the fluctuation in the unencumbered fund balance is not tied to the overall budget because the fund balance is the net result of revenues and expenditures.
But let me ask you then, if, since, have there been, have you seen then in reviewing information whether there's been any particular areas of the county budget that may have seen increases where others have seen decreases?
As far as revenues, actual
Yes.
revenues,
Actual revenues, yes.
I would have to do a more detailed investigation.
Member Erickson?
I remember when we used to ask this is not anything about the prior county administrator, but you'd ask what was the unencumbered fund balance, and there'd be like the super duper unencumbered fund balance, and then the not so super duper unencumbered fund balance, and then the kind of unencumbered fund balance, and then the real unencumbered fund balance, okay? To me, this unencumbered fund balance, as I understand it, is what we can actually spend. The county board could go in and get money out of this unencumbered fund balance, subject to our reserve requirements, right? That's money that is truly unencumbered. That's okay. I'd like to
Yes.
ask follow-up questions because she was allowed. Okay. Do we have other balances that we make, because I think this goes to Member Walrap's questions, do we have other balances that may be kind of unencumbered, but not so much unencumbered? I mean, but maybe by statute they have to be there, or by budget policy they have to be there, or for some reason they have to be there. Because I think what some members would like to know is, all right, this is our pure unencumbered fund balance, but never could understand the definition. Well, how do you define unencumbered fund balance? Because I never could get that answer as many times as I tried to get it. I mean, it's just like, what's the unencumbered fund balance? Well, if you count this, then it's this. But if you look at this, you look at that. But if you go over here, it's there. Like, I don't do this every day. I do this once a month, okay? And you guys do this every day. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I do think there are some other monies out there that's kind of sitting out there that might be by statute or by budget policy or just sitting there. And I don't know what all of those are, but maybe you know more about it than I do.
I know just a little bit more than you do, but I would say that there are differences between restricted and unrestricted and unencumbered. And I would prefer to defer to our experts in those fields, such as Michelle Anderson or Becky McNeil, to give a true accounting of the differences between those different designations. But I do know that they exist and they are also part of our budget. Um, One other thing to consider in this as part of your restricted would be the special funds that many of the departments have, where fees and fines, if you're talking about the circuit clerk's office or any of the criminal justice partners, they have monies that are coming into that are then designated by statute to go into special fee funds that would not be part of what we're counting here in this general fund, which is unencumbered.
My follow-up to that would be, I think that's what some of us would like to know. But I never could figure out the restricted versus the unrestricted. It just started I do this once a month and it started like, I don't know what you're talking about anymore. But but it somehow, if that could get broken down, that might be helpful, but I don't even know how you do that because I don't even know where you would start on that. But one of the reasons why I asked for this information was I wanted to just point out that fees are part of our budget, and fees do, if the fees aren't paying for a certain department, that money would have to come out of the general fund, wouldn't it? Okay, and so that's what that was not an argument that the fee should be increased. The county gets to make a policy decision on each department as to whether the fee should go up or not go up. But if the fees aren't significant, to cover the expenses of that department, then that money has to come out of the general fund, I believe. I think that's a true statement. It has to come from somewhere. And so it is my recollection of two things here. Kathy Michael came about several years ago, and I think that if my recollection is correct, this was about the time when they needed new computers because of the state changed the law regarding voting, that you could register the same day. And I thought, I don't remember, Warab, do you remember that? Were you in finance? And we paid for almost $100,000 to $200,000 of funds for computers. I mean, did we take that out of the general fund, or did she have that in her unencumbered general fund, or where did it come from? I can't even remember. And if you don't know, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but the point of the question is there's other money sitting out there. Okay. Member Metzger, there are other money sitting out there. And the point is, some of us would like to know, does each department have their own little reserve fund that they have? And does each, I mean, because I'd like to know several years ago where we actually got that money. If we got it actually out of, was it some of that, you think? I mean, we can't remember where that came from. And then also the land use or the land use committee, and this was when member Gordon was the chair, but I was the vice chair of that. I remember we did raise fees because we were concerned that our fees weren't meeting the expenses. Lo and behold, the wind farms came in and and raised our fees, but there was a point in time where we were concerned that the fees weren't meeting the expenses in the building and zoning department. So what we did was we raised the fees so we wouldn't have to subsidize it out of the general fund. I just don't remember what year that was, but I remember it was bipartisan, and that's what we did. Um, so at some point, I think it might be helpful to the committee if we could find those numbers out as well, but I don't know how to break them down. I have no clue how you would break that down. I wouldn't even know where to tell you to start. I mean,
I think we could do that, but in general, what we will tell you is that any department that is funded out of the general fund, they don't have their own rainy day fund as well. It all goes in the general fund. Even other sources of revenue, like how right after, I think it was in 19, that the county board passed the amount of tax that you wanted on the legalized cannabis, that all goes in the general fund. Now, we could ask Miss McNeil how much, and she does report to you how much revenue you are making on that tax, but it goes into the general fund. So that if a department needed an expense outside of what you passed as the budget policy for this year, above and beyond the budgeted amount, we would go into the general fund with your approval and pay for that expense, and it's mixed together, all of that revenue. So there isn't any department that reports to through the general fund that has their own rainy day fund separately.
I think an example of that for this year is something we saw recently, and that was the increase in our insurance. That was not even close to being budgeted. Was it a 200% increase? I mean, it was a
Like a
crazy amount increase,
248%. Yeah.
and the only place to go for it, we were told, was in the unencumbered fund balance. So that was a significant hit to our budget. So I'm assuming for this year, then, we have to increase that amount and hope that EAV or something happens, or we will decrease the unencumbered fund balance even more. Is that how it works?
I would say yes, that is how it works as a general synopsis. You know, every year when we do the budget, it's just that. We create this budget. We start creating this budget in May for the subsequent year. And so as we go through all of those iterations of working with department heads and trying to plan for future revenues and expenditures, it's a budget. So sometimes you're off. And so when we have those expenditures that are surprising and coming in over our expected revenues. For example, the wind farms, the wind turbines that we've generated, those fees coming in. Those were projected, but they came in a great deal more than we anticipated. So that was a great increase that went back into our general fund. And then every once in a while, you'll have a surprise in your expenditures, like Administrator Rodriguez explained with the insurance, that that was not what we projected to see. And so that comes out of the general fund. Yes. Anything you want to add?
Are there any other questions? Member Erickson.
So going back to the budget policy, are you saying the unencumbered fund now is at 10 point? You have to help me understand the terms, okay? Because when you say like, well, it's the total combined annual budget, but if you look at the annual budget, but not the total combined annual budget, then I mean, I mean, I can never figure that stuff out when you guys start talking that way to me. But I thought it was referenced that it was the fund balance is 10.7%. Was that correct? Would that be presently of the county's total combined annual budget?
Yes, 105 million.
Okay, so that would be 10.7% now? Okay. Does that number usually fluctuate during the year? Does it go, is it up in the, like in the, down in the spring and up again in the fall, or do we?
The percentage?
Yeah,
Well, it would be down in the spring because we haven't collected property taxes yet.
okay, so that's probably why it's at 10.7 right now.
That was at 12/31, yeah.
Yeah,
So then it'll go up in the summer as we collect property tax.
Okay.
It fluctuates all year long.
that was last year, okay, all right, okay.
So Member Woolrab has a question.
So on that same figure, the unencumbered fund balance, that was, we look at that sometimes as operating days. Is that the figure we sometimes look at, number of operating days we have sort of in
Yes.
so in the rainy day fund, I guess I'll say.
Yes,
So,
you could.
so the fact that it's decreased over this time frame that's on your chart by 5%, that was, I mean, 10% to me. So I think I calculated that's like a month's worth of drop. We've gone from about having 4 months, approximately, roughly, very roughly, of operating funds, I think, to 3 months with the 10%. So that makes me uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know what, what do county people who know much more about this recommend, and we've had that conversation. I know we've had that conversation before, how much is enough as a rainy day fund? But I just want to point out that it has dropped, and we were lucky here in this pandemic that we didn't see a sharp decrease in revenues, which I thought we were going to, and many people did. But something, obviously something could happen. So is that enough? Was that wise to let it drop? Is it wise to let it drop that month's worth of operating time?
I know that Member or Vice Chair Thompson and Member Friedrich had questions too. So Ms. Taylor, if you could answer that, and then we can go to them.
So that is a question that we have been asking ourselves, and we also anticipated that you might be asking, someone in the committee might be asking. And so we did reach out to Michelle Anderson, our auditor, and she represented to us that the GFOA recommended in the past, they've recommended 10 to 15% of your total budget to be your range. But she did also let us know that currently that recommendation is about 2 months of your total budget. So I would, myself, Cassie Taylor, would say that we are within that range, but at the lower end.
Member Friedrich, your question or comment?
I go to Gerald Thompson. He's raised his hand a couple times. I will follow
And I missed
Gerald.
him. I'm so sorry. It's hard to do. So I apologize, Vice Chair. Please.
That's okay. It's, so can you hear me first of all, just to make sure I haven't covered earlier? So to the rainy day fund question, that's probably more an issue with our bond rating. Would that be an accurate statement? And that would probably be be the guiding force on that, whether it's 10 or 15%, and where the recommendations come on how it relates to the rating. Would you have a comment on that?
The overall bond rating is impacted with the amount that we have in our reserves, but I would have to refer to Chapman and Cutler to get an up-to-date estimate on that for you on how that would be impacted. But you are correct, it does impact.
Well, I think that would be good information to have as we look to discuss what's the good number, the right number for the rainy day fund. I mean, we're just guessing, and having the data that drives that would be important. Next thing on the, I see we have these, as I looked as we had these fees, but from what I'm showing or what I'm seeing, I don't know whether we had 10 campsites rented or 10,000. I'm assuming we have these numbers and we can get an idea of total revenues that each one of these activities generate. Would that be correct?
I think I heard the question correctly. You're asking if we could break down for Parks and Rec what their total revenues were for the year in each of those areas that we've identified?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that the fee went from $15 to 18 really doesn't tell us anything. I mean, we need to know total revenues, and that you need the bigger picture than just the rate increase. And then also as a part of that, the costs that are associated with each of these items, I'm assuming they have those, and those are used as you work to come up with these fee increases. Would that be accurate?
So I do not believe that Mike Steffa has done a cost benefit analysis. I think he goes on a percentage increase each year, or calculates what neighboring communities are charging for their parks. But if that is the request of the finance committee and the board for us to look into those in-depth kind of calculations, we could look into that.
Well, it kind of goes to the fact that we have a lagoon that we need to clean out, and that's all a result of people using the facility. I mean, yeah, I think those are things you need to know, and at least if we're losing money on it, we need to know how much money we're losing, so that we go in this deal with our eyes open, as opposed to thinking we're raising money and we're really, we're losing ground. So I think that would be very important information to have an idea of where we're at. One final comment, Chairman Messer, you mentioned the tree removal or trees down this year. I would be cautious evaluating trees and being down this year, just because of the ice storms we had this year. I mean, it doesn't matter where you're at. It was devastating to a lot of trees. So, I mean, I've got a lot of tree limbs still down that I need to get picked up. So this is just a really bad year. I'm not saying they aren't more than normal, but I would be cautious on that because it was a bad year. That's all I have for right now.
And this will dovetail on to what Vice Chair Thompson said, and my question would be, you said that all of this goes into the general fund. Is it in a separate line item that you can actually get to that information?
There are separate line items for like boat rental fees and such. So yes, I believe we could get a good idea.
And then also, obviously, we would not be able to look at 2020 because, I mean, we really didn't rent out a whole lot, I wouldn't think. Did we go ahead and were we as busy last year?
We had a banner year in 2020. Parks and Rec brought in more money from user fees than they have in recent years.
What's our percent of the entire budget that Parks and Recs brings in? I think that would be because you could maybe raise the fees 100% and still only bring in 5% of the budget or 2% of the budget. And I'm not saying that we don't consider it or we don't. I think Vice Chair Thompson makes a good point. We need to know what's it costing us, and are we being reciprocated for the amount that it costs to do that?
Well, I guess I would say too, and not just for Parks and Rec, but any area within county government where we choose fees or where we have fees, I think that probably we as a committee or an organization need to have a conversation about, what our values are, right, around those services that we're providing. Is the idea that the fees are going to 100% pay for those services, or are we going to be okay saying, well, we're going to underwrite 50 or 75% of those services from property taxes or from the general fund if something comes up. I mean, I think that's part of a larger conversation, right, about how we want to structure the services we're providing to the community, and how we pay for those things.
And if I may, I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of page 4 where Kathy Dreyer completed this analysis, and it does indicate that only 26% of our tax levy supports the general fund. The remaining 74% do come from fees, services, federal and state grants, and other sources. So the property tax, that surprised me for one. I thought it would be a higher percentage, but it was only at 26%.
And if I may, and as you all know, there are some departments that rely heavily on state and federal grants. Our Child Advocacy Center and that department is heavily grant funded with, to my knowledge, no fees, right? But they bring in a significant amount of revenue from those grants. So certainly it is about values and that we bring public service to people in our county. Not, I'll be the one to say, not necessarily to make a profit, right? And obviously that's a value. Although I will say, I think we were pleased that the fees did pay for one of the pontoon boats this last year, a brand new pontoon boat. So it was also part and parcel because this community made lemonades out of the lemon of having to be sheltered in place and instead came out to enjoy the fresh air and rent a pontoon boat.
Can we, Vice Chair, can we move to Member Friedrich? And then we'll come back to you, Member Friedrich.
Okay, I have 3 questions. The first question, I'm going to wait till administration gives an explanation on the American Rescue Plan. On the revenue side of that, I'll wait for them to explain that because, to be quite frank, I'm a little skeptical, what they are promising us as a county in the next 3 years. So let's not spend our money before we even have it in place. But that's question 1. Question 2, getting back to Member Erickson's lengthy questioning on the unencumbered balance, page 9 of 18, where we're talking with the fund balance of 12 to 15%. My question is, if our range has been from 9 to nearly 18%, that's been the range in the last 10 years, why are we settling on 12 to 15? That's question 2. Moving off of that, I'm happy with what this committee's done as far as, let me go to the page. Be patient. Spending levels, I'm happy that we haven't made any changes to that, and any amendments to our budgets other than those that are proposed today. So I'm happy about point 3. That's the only questions I have. I yield back.
Vice Chair Thompson.
I just want to be clear. I wasn't, by my questioning, I was not suggesting we turn this into a profit center. I just think we need to know what our cost structures are as we evaluate these fees and things like that. I do have a question. You said the 74% comes from state, federal, and fees charged. Do you have, by chance, approximately a percent of each where the state, and I don't need exact, but I'm just curious, is it like an equal split, or is it almost all one, or any idea where they're at?
I'd have to look that up. It's different for every department. So.
Oh, okay, so it's not like an easy answer. I didn't. That's fine. I thought maybe you might know off the top of your head. That's okay. Thank
I
you.
could look into it and see what I can find.
Thank you.
So we had quite a bit of discussion at our last meeting. And regarding several things, but one of them in particular I can recall is maintenance of buildings. And then also a conversation about, does each department head have a drop file or information on things that, if the revenues were enough, what do they believe really needs to be taken care of? As well as, we also had a brief discussion about salary increases and those kinds of things. So, I guess I would like to maybe address those issues and have a conversation about that, starting with the maintenance of buildings. And I know that we have two members from the property committee that are well aware of what needs to be done and what deferred maintenance has taken place. And I believe there's also, and I left it at home today, but there was also a capital fund or capital plan that is in place. So I'd like to maybe have a conversation about that money has to come from the general fund. Is that accurate?
So during the budget process, we meet with the Director of Facilities Management, Mr. Doherty, and he breaks down what is needed throughout the year for maintenance on equipment and the buildings. And we build that into the budget through the O&M levy from the PBC. And the large items are built into the capital improvement plan. And I believe that this year, with well, not this year, but over the next 3 years, with the American Rescue Plan dollars, that we will be able to charge some of those projects to the rescue plan, or use the money that's freed up from the rescue plan from the budget, use those freed up dollars to do more improvements.
What would be the estimate of that? I mean, would it be significant enough to would it be significant enough to make a difference?
Yes.
And I know I asked this question in a conversation that you and I had, and that is, if it's not enough, or if we really believe that there are some things that need to be addressed more immediate, can we do a bond?
We would have to look into that. It's my understanding that the bonds are for specific projects. But when I've been researching the American Rescue Plan and its allowable uses, and the majority of the things that are in the capital improvement plan, I believe can be paid for with the American Rescue Plan. And that frees up dollars to do additional projects or maintenance or improvements.
If I may, more research needs to be done on the bond issue, but our preliminary research did reveal that if, for example, we wanted to replace all of the elevators, we could likely pursue a bond for that. I don't think we could pursue a bond to do an elevator in one building, a boiler in another. Does that make sense? Almost similar to if you went to your bank and got a home improvement loan to do the roof and the front porch, that's probably okay. But in this case, it would likely need to be very specific. We need to do more to corroborate that statement, and so that's a very preliminary look-see at what a bond could be used for.
Well, I guess I just want to remind the committee that we are in the very beginning stages of this budget process for the year, and part of the property committee's agenda for this upcoming month, but also subsequent months, is to review that capital improvement plan and to um, devise those long-term projects that we put into that plan. I do believe that any talk about changing our levies would be a in-depth discussion with our state's attorney's office, as well as Chapman and Cutler and the PBC, as those would all be tied. There's representations that we make as part of that, and that is all very complicated. And the information I've received is that we always go through Chapman and Cutler, as do the majority of the counties, because of the in-depth process that is involved with that. Um, and so I welcome this discussion and the direction that this committee is giving us, but there will be a lot of questions that we won't be able to answer at this time.
Member Barnett.
I, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I guess I would say, from a property standpoint, one of the concerns that we've had in general, right, is just keeping up with projects when they come up. Last year, we replaced the elevators in 200 West Front. And, the elevators, one of them had been down for 18 months. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. About 18 months. It sat there and it was down before we could start the process to fix those. And thankfully, there were two elevators in that building, right? But even still, on some days, like the one would still have issues, right? So people were taking the stairs, and that's what a 5-story, 4-story building, right? Um, Now we ended up replacing those, but we had to do a 10-year loan through the Public Building Commission to be able to finance that. And and maybe we're saying, well, that's not such a bad thing because we can spread that out over 10 years. But to us, I guess, in conversations we've had, in property committee, is that it sort of speaks to a lack of long-term planning in the future for when things like that come up. And that's not a reflection at all on staff. It's just, I think we haven't had those conversations before. And we've started them last year when we reformatted the capital improvement plan. We started going down that road. We're hoping that in the future we'll be able to do a better job of staying on top of some of those things. But I guess that's partially, I think, why we had brought some of those things up last year, is that there are needs like that, and a lot of times there just doesn't seem to be the dollars to take care of those needs. And I would, if I may also mention, Member Erickson put in the packet in his email the need that the circuit clerk's office has for for the digital. I'm sorry, it's the
EJAS,
well.
Electronic Justice
Oh,
System.
I'm sorry. I thought the filing was outside of Aegis. Okay.
I don't believe it is, but
Well, I probably say it's synonymous with electronic filing is the stuff that the state mandated, and it's through Aegis, isn't it? I mean, it's part of it. Isn't it? The system they have over there now is an old system. That's all I know. And it's not really compatible with electronic filing. They're trying to make it compatible, but it takes a lot of extra man hours to do it.
So,
Yeah.
That is correct. It takes a lot of extra work from Don Everhart and his team to make that work.
so I guess in a broader picture, right? I mean that's another great example of an impact that's sitting out there within another department, and I don't feel like we've really had good, thoughtful conversations as a committee and as with staff to say, hey, we need to start prioritizing those things as we're building out our budget. I feel like in general, we pass the budget memo, it goes through, staff prepares the budget, they make sure that we stay within these boundaries, and then we approve it and we go on. And year after year, like we keep talking about some of these things. And I would like to see us as a county position ourselves into, instead of, putting out fires when they come up, to be more forward thinking with our planning in all areas of our budget.
And I think that's what we really had a conversation, that asking as a please, if I'm stepping on, if I'm not saying this correctly, or if this is not a general consensus, but I felt there was a consensus from a majority of people on this committee to ask each department head to do just what you were talking about, Member Barnett, and that is to put together the list of things that are must-haves, nice-to-haves, critical, and prioritize and look at a long-term plan to actually meet some of these needs, as opposed to the fire is there, we need to put it out, and let's hope we don't get another fire because we don't have any money. Or we tell each department head, decrease your budget by 10%. Well, what does that tell them? That tells them that the stuff that I have way back here, all the things that I need that I've never discussed, are never going to come up. And at least if we know what they are, then we can look at revenue sources potentially. We don't even know what some of them are. And so I, for one, would like to see that happen at a departmental level, to see what are those things that really need to be done, and that have been put on the back burner or never addressed. So do I have a consensus on that? I'm getting a shaking head from Member Barnett, but Member Woolram.
You have my approval of that approach because if we want to carry that metaphor a little farther, it's a lot less expensive to buy the fire extinguisher than it is to put out the fire. And a lot less damage is done. So I would like to see us be as proactive, forward thinking as we possibly can.
Member Erickson.
As a follow-up to that, I mean, I was hoping, they were already doing that to some extent. I mean, the department heads are giving you some guidance as to what their priorities are and what are not their priorities are. The one thing I did want to be clear about was, when I had, sorry, Member Metzger, I gotta go back to this just quickly. When I had asked about the fees at Cumlara Park, it wasn't because I really want to get in and micromanage the property committees, management of the fees at Cumlara Park. That wasn't my objective. It's just we were told that crap happens and we have to fix crap. So, that's probably the, I don't know how else to say it, but, so we have to fix it. But, but my point was, hey, we got to look at fees too. I mean, when anytime you're looking at any individual department's issues, you got to look at their fees too. But going back to the, so I hope we don't, I don't know if the finance committee's job to be micromanaging what Cumlara Park fees are. That's a properties committee's purview, I think. I could be wrong about that, but the only reason I mentioned that was, I suppose we're going to have to find some money somewhere to pay for that. Okay, and I just was suggesting that, in the future, as we look at that, members of the county board have got to consider that, well, we can just raise taxes. Well, there's people like me that have a little bit general, like, I don't really want to raise taxes, but I have voted for fee increases. Okay. So I tend to be more of a user fee type person than I am a tax increase person. And so members have to consider that's just a source of the revenue that we have to look at. And that's what I wanted to mention. But back to your point, I don't have any problem going back, having them prioritize, but I guess it's always been my understanding that's what they do. Are they not doing that at all? Are they not telling us what they need?
Yes, each year the department heads will tell us what their needs are, and many times they'll put something out there as a wish list kind of item. I will also inform the committee that our recent department head budget meeting, we included two slides in their PowerPoint presentation that addressed some questions that just overall broad strokes for the American Rescue Plan allowable expenses, and asked each of the department heads to bring to their budget meetings, in addition to their budget, to also bring us any critical priorities that they see that they've identified in their department. And we're hoping that that will help us with not only the regular operating expenses, which I think they are very comfortable in bringing to us, but then also those infrastructure needs like space and IT or equipment or facilities, or just even the maintenance. Something as simple as, hey, when's the next time we can get our walls painted? That wouldn't be a critical need, but it would be something that we would want to be aware of.
Well, I mean, my question would be then, I suppose the county administration then looks at their wish list and says, well, this is what we got, and this is how we're gonna have to work this out, and this is the money you have. I mean, is the wish list like, this is a super confidential wish list? Like, we can only be seen by these eyes. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter to me if you guys see the wish list only, but I mean, but I gotta believe that somewhere you're looking at the wish list too and say, well, you might have to wait a year on that, or you might have to wait a couple years on that.
It's been my style, for example, I'm sorry, Member Wilrab. It's been my style, for example, to encourage department heads to fill out the personnel request form. So if they want to add staff, for example, um, and wasn't it two departments, I think, definitely did that, and we did not agree to add staff because we couldn't find the resources to do it. But I encouraged it because even though the answer was no, the documentation was there from last year that the request was made. So there are wish lists like that of staffing, um, and other things, and it's not super top secret with 3 passwords to get into. We're happy to share it. Um, I also will say a moment of caution to really, really like encouraging the wish list without a point of caution to department heads that the resources might still be the same. And so I hope I'm
That's,
expressing
that's what
myself
I'm
well.
saying. I mean, we're gonna come out here encouraging them to do a wish list. We're gonna get more than what we think we bargained for today. We could be
Absolutely.
ready to be careful about what we're asking for. I mean,
Yes, and actually the phrase we used in that budget meeting was, don't see dollar signs. That this is indeed a wish list, but I would also let you know that this isn't a list that we keep under lock and key. That's a document that we could provide. This is usually a conversation with the department head in the budget sessions, and when they bring their budget, for example, I don't think he'd mind me sharing this. We asked for a wish list last year from our IT division, and he came with numbers that were greatly increased from the previous year, and said, you asked for a wish list. So we also knew then what his priorities were, and we were able to filter that back down to something that was manageable with the funds that we had available in this current budget year.
yeah, I was just addressing the consensus that Member Metzger was looking for and just adding the caution. I mean, if we're gonna go around saying we need to make everything, these department heads come and give us their priorities, they're already doing it. And if we encourage them to do it more, we may end up down a road we don't wanna go. I mean, it may not be not what we think it'll be.
Member Wilrab.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, and I don't know what the mechanisms have been either in the last few years or the prior 10 years when we had different administrators. Um, But somehow we have ended up in a situation where we have what I believe is lots of deferred maintenance on things that are like the elevator that is now taken care of. But um, so whether the department heads are saying, this is my wish list, and then they have to prioritize the things that are of a critical immediate need, and we don't somehow get to those things that are, they're not maybe today, but they're going to get here, like the elevators got here, and many other things that we have talked about in property. And so somehow we have to And I think you're starting to do that, get the culture of where this is also important. You know, this today, the stuff you need to operate next year on the budget is critical, but we also need to be able to start funding these other things so we don't end up with the huge dollar amounts that were because we didn't do the necessary deferred maintenance.
So the other topic that I had a conversation with Ms. Taylor, and that had to do with non-union salary ranges and the compensation program that exists in the county, which I think Administrator Rodriguez has mentioned a number of times, that Member Woolrab and I have both expressed some desire to have that looked at. And that can open a Pandora's box also, just like what Member Erickson just mentioned. However, I am just curious. It's my understanding that salaries come out of the general fund. Is that correct? There is no other place for it, is the general fund.
For the, for the departments in the general fund, their salaries come out of there.
So if there is an increase, an annual increase, which I think has been about 1.99% in the past 4 years, is that number correct? Average? We are giving, that has to come out of the general fund, and we are at the max levy, so we can't levy anymore. We have to see that additional revenue, either from the 15% of the general fund fee revenue or an increase in EAV. Is that accurate?
So our tax levy will increase this year proportionate to the increase in the EAV.
So the increase in EAV is, in the past, it has been, it looks like we've looked at an increase of 12%, 12.75%.
Over the
Overall.
last 10 years.
Overall in the last 10 years. So, not in 1 year, obviously. So what plans do we have to look at the salary compensation program as it exists here at the county?
Our current plans are in the planning stage, and we are looking to connect with community partners to conduct a salary study, and we're going that route first to um, hopefully find a way to do it in without a tremendous, consultation fee. Um, and what we want to get out of that, maybe I should talk about the outcome so that the committee can understand where we would go with that next. We are hoping to find out, are we competitive with other industry in town, as well as even with municipalities in town, or even, and we're hoping that whomever we connect with will also study some of the similarly situated county governments in the state, especially central Illinois. Are we competitive with other county governments in what we pay our employees, and even perhaps in our benefit package provision? Because I think that when we're talking about employees, you cannot talk about retaining or attracting without also mentioning the entire package. And I think that, we know, just this is very anecdotal, we know people work here because they love it. They don't necessarily work here because they make the most money doing what they love to do. And we're grateful for those employees that are so loyal to the public service. But we also think the time is right. And you know this policy wise, because we have to come to you often and say, we want to hire a new fill in the blank position, and it's not competitive, and in order to get that person on staff we have to go outside of policy, and we need your approval. So that's the chicken and the egg of it, and that is where we hope to go. But I will say, to you, and I've said it to Chairman Metzger and others of you individually, if the study is done and it comes back that we are not competitive, how are we going to attack that? Is it going to be a phased in plan, kind of like the capital improvement plan, where we have years 1, 2, and 3, and this is how we're going to raise salaries, and we perhaps can't afford it all at once? I'm jumping ahead to what I feel the outcome might be of this, and that we are not competitive. We see that just by how we navigate through our own policy. But the actions that we're taking right now are reaching out to some of our community friends to see if they will do this study with and for us. Thank you.
Have we covered all of the topics that we need to cover, or that we've needed to cover based on those conversations before? The only thing I think we have outstanding is our American rescue plan discussion. Are we good with proceeding into that discussion? Member Friedrich and Vice Chair Thompson and Member Lehman? Okay, perfect. We will proceed with that. And I think, I don't know if Ms. Dryer is our expert or who wants to take this, but I will shut off and listen.
Chairman, I was going to set the table just to, and many of you have been really great public servants and have listened to many webinars about this, but I'll just set the table to tell you what the federal government says the funds can be used for at a very high level. This is not micro at all, it's just very high level. First and foremost, the funds can be used to support a public health response. It can also be used, or the funds can also be used to address negative economic impacts for the community, though. So those examples include supporting small businesses, or rebuilding capacity of workers and even families. So that one is complicated. Replace public sector revenue loss. Water and sewer infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, and even taking a look at the employees who have been serving the COVID response, and so that one is also complicated. But I know that when we learned about this initial list of the things that these dollars can be used for. We also noted that they need to be equity based, and that there also is a small list of ineligible services. So I won't read those off because I don't want to taint the primary focus of talking about what the monies can be used for. But Ms. Dreyer has done well to take a look at what the examples are, and then mitigate that by making a list of things that we already have planned to spend, for example, in capital improvement, talking about water and sewer infrastructure, and then thinking ahead to how, if we were able to use the American Rescue Plan Act for those already planned expenditures that appear to be applicable, that would free up dollars in the budget and offset the cost, basically. So I can hand it over to you now to explain a little more. Thank you.
So with the American Rescue Plan, we have been allotted over $33 million. And what the first step is to request the funds. So we're planning to sometime this week do our first request. And once we do that, we will receive 50% of the 33 million. and then the remaining amount will come a year later. So going through the allowable expenditures, it's a broad overview. Um, so some of the projects that I identified were replacing boilers and chillers and HVAC systems in the buildings because that falls under public health response in mitigating COVID-19. Another area is water and sewer infrastructure, and we can use that money for cleaning out the lagoon at Kamilar Park. And in our capital improvement plan, there were several items related to water conditioning systems and also connecting city water to the highway department. They brought that up the other day. But those can be, those things that we budgeted for, we can now pay for with the American Rescue Plan. And then another big one in there is recovery of lost revenue. So what they do is they look at, they take the base year before COVID. So for us, that would be 2019. And they take 3 years of revenue beyond that or before that, and you calculate your percentage increase in revenue. And then they have another formula to calculate what your revenue could have been had COVID not happened. And we can do that for 2020 and then again calculate it for 21, 22, and 23. Because these funds have to be obligated by 12/31 of 24 and then fully expended by 12/31 of 26. But the lost revenue dollars we can use for our infrastructure, such as repaving parking lots in the buildings, building a new bait shop at Parks and Rec, improvements to the buildings. And we are planning, we're hoping that it will help us pay for the new Aegis system. So what we do is it's quarterly reports that you submit, and as long as you can tie them to those categories, it is approved.
So if I may, um, Kathy has been on numerous webinars and has also been on the phone with a gentleman who is, was a monitor of, I don't know what his
He
title
was a
is.
speaker on the webinar.
And so he was from the Treasury, I believe, associated with the Treasury. And so we were asking what if questions to him because I, for one, have a similar natural proclivity to be skeptical of big lots of money falling in my lap. And so we have been asking lots of questions of, how does this work? If we had, for instance, this expense, would this fit under the criteria that you, as you read it, as you identify it? And so some of the things that we have put on our tentative list to be coded to this American Rescue Plan were things that we reviewed with him.
So you have a comfort level that you have a pretty good comfort level that the direction we're going should generate the 33 million ultimately.
Yes.
Member Woolrab.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathy, when you and I watched that webinar that one day together, and thank you again for inviting me to that because it was very informative and heard the things that we just went over in a little more detail. One of the things, the people that were on it were from Illinois because through a county chair organization. One of the things some of the counties were talking about was extending, improving their broadband to the rural areas. And I think, I mean, I could go into a long discussion about why I think that's a great idea. But I wondered what you, in the meantime, might have heard about, because I think there were questions being asked back and forth about, what does this involve kind of thing, and what's the real feasibility of it, and what's the real need sort of thing. And some communities were already investigating that, or counties were. So I wondered if you'd gotten any more information about that.
I have not heard anything more about that.
Okay. Because and this would not be obviously for this year, but if we're looking at obligating funds and we have, I don't know what you did, whether you listed off now just $33 million worth of
No, it's
stuff.
not yet.
And I don't know what improving rural broadband would cost, but clearly here in McLean County, there appears to be the need for it. I mean, just judging from some of our co-board members struggle with connectivity during the pandemic and our remote meetings this past year, it would seem to me that it would be not only a good quality of life thing for people in the rural district areas, but also an economic necessity at this point, much like rural electrification was in the 30s for rural areas. And, if I think it would be good at this point to start asking questions like that to see if, like in a year or 2 years, some of this money should be obligated, whether there's a need, what it would cost, and getting all those questions answered, so that we can see start to plan ahead to see whether this is something we want to spend some of that money on. And question mark how much some is, because it certainly seems like it would be, if we have a need for it, it would be a wonderful way, because clearly the private industry is not going to do it because it's not profitable to them. So this is probably once in a lifetime opportunity to fill that hole.
From what I heard on that webinar, I think we would have to collaborate with a private company. So that would take some research.
And I'm not suggesting that we know it today, but I mean, I think that should be something we should put on a list to investigate and decide maybe for next year whether that's something we should pursue and can pursue. Thanks.
We have two questions. We have Vice Chair Thompson and Member Lehman. So Vice Chair Thompson.
I would just like to go back to Member Walrap's comment about broadband service. You're going to have to be very careful because there's companies out here in rural areas that have gone and made major investments. I have really good service. Now, if somebody can't figure out how to work their computer, that doesn't necessarily mean you have bad service. So I would be very careful before you start saying that there's not services available out here. We've got good service, and they are making upgrades, and they are working very hard to stay competitive. So I'd be cautious on that.
Just to respond to that for a moment, that I think I requested that we investigate what the need is, and if there is a need, to look at how or if we can fill it.
I think I heard you say that they weren't doing it and they had no intention of doing it because it wasn't profitable. That's what I heard.
I meant if there is a need for it, they're not going to fill the need.
Member Lehman.
Thank you. I don't want to get into a rabbit hole of wish list with this. One of the things that I did hear as some of the things that might be on the list of things that we can do going forward with it, infrastructure things like HVAC, boilers, different things with our buildings, et cetera, seem to maybe be all items that we could potentially look at for energy efficiency. So when we're purchasing, making a large purchase, it's something that's ultimately going to save us a lot of money down the line. I know this is something that has perhaps come up in previous conversations with other board members along the way. I was curious, with funds like this, is looking towards an energy efficiency study and partnership with an energy efficiency, organization. Is that something that would be covered, or is it just the purchase of those particular entities, like like an HVAC system?
It would be the purchases and the replacements.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Additional questions related to the Recovery Act? All right, seeing none, I'd like to go ahead and let's now address the issue that we really have to, and that is request approval of the amended McLean County Board resolution establishing the budget policy. And I know this all related to that, so I don't want to imply that it wasn't, but we also need to now review this document starting, I think, on page 8, and it goes through page, looks like 16. So there are we have a few areas that, and I would think, Ms. Taylor, if you can go through and explain the changes that were made and provide us with some insight, so then we can have either have a discussion and then ultimately vote on the outcome.
Thank you, Chairman Metzger. I believe all of the changes to this budget document are on page 9. We made three areas where in red, where we have identified changes based on feedback and instruction we received from the Finance Committee at our last session. So the first one would be under 2.1B, and that's under the property tax and other revenue. We have stricken B, and the purpose for that was if we were to maximize our general fund tax levy to the 0.25 and look at some of the needs that you identified in our last session, we felt that this statement, even if we did look at that and try to keep our overall property tax rate as close as possible, that it might be beneficial to strike this statement in relation to that. Last year, there was a discussion on our budget in the fall. I believe the original presented budget was over in our rate by a small amount, and we were asked to reduce that, find the reductions in that to bring it down to the same or less than the previous year. And so that's the statement in this complete budget document that would be in relation to that. So that's the first thing that we've changed. And I don't know if you want to discuss that first or if you want me to go through all the changes on this page.
Does anybody have any concerns with 2.1B being struck? All right, Member Erickson.
Yeah, I'm not going to be voting in favor of these proposed budget policy because I believe 2.1B has been in there for a long time. And I think it served the county well. So I will be voting no.
Member Barnett.
I think I made the motion to approve this to begin with, and I guess I'm wondering, would it be better to vote on these changes one at a time rather than the whole thing? Would that be?
My suggestion to you, since it's already has as one action item, is to go through each one. Um, and if you have a consensus, have a consensus. But if you don't, then after you've gone through, someone can make a motion to amend this action item with different changes, and then vote on that amendment, and then vote on the action item.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
I believe Member Lehman had a question or a comment.
Yes, I did. On this one, first off, perhaps an adjustment. It still says with the following recommendation, which would then flow into the user fees and charges. So I was curious if that was left in for for additional considerations to be plugged in, or if that's intended to be flown into the user fees and charges section, or if that's just something that we should, Scrivener's error and strike out as well.
I believe, as it is written, it would be crossed out as well. So it would stop with a period instead of a comma after fiscal year 2022. And then with the following recommendation would also be stricken.
Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. And then just as a follow-up piece, one of the things that really stuck out in our conversation previously was the mentality of the overall culture within our county community, within the offices, and folks actually being a little bit nervous to bring up, hey, I have this larger budgeted item, or I have something that really does need to be done, but still having a mentality of, oh, I need to pull back. I perhaps shouldn't bring up these really important preventative maintenance things that should be done to ultimately save us money in the long term, because of the fear, with anything that would remotely suggest any kind of increase along the way. I'm completely in favor of striking out B, because I think that's one of those things that this doesn't, in striking out B, it's not saying, hey, we need to raise it, we need to do this thing. It's just allowing the space for folks to really think about what it is that their department needs, and remove maybe some of the fear or some of the hesitancy to have authentic, realistic conversations about the needs, and make sure that things are obviously prioritized, and we're not voting willy-nilly, or making decisions willy-nilly on things, but at least allowing space for those decisions to be considered along the way. So I am in favor of this part being stricken. Thank you.
Member Friedrich, and then we will go to Vice Chair Thompson. Member Friedrich.
Yeah, I'd just like Chuck to elaborate a little bit on keeping that in place, because I quite frankly was going to go with administration and their recommendation, and I do respect Member Erickson, and I'm just kind of surprised that he would be voting against it. So follow up with a little more detail with me, Chuck, please.
Well, I could take Member Barnett's position they took with Member Schaefer and say that I'm not here to be cross-examined on my views on this, but that has been the policy. Um, uh, that has been the policy of the county for years, to keep the tax rate as close as possible to the previous tax rate. And contrary to what Member Lehman has mentioned, it doesn't necessarily mean that the tax rate won't go up. It doesn't necessarily mean the tax rate will go down, but it does encourage during the budget process that our goal is to try to keep the tax rate as low as we possibly can. And that is budget policy. And I think if we take it out, um, uh, skies could be the limit, because we don't know where that ends up. I know people will say, well, that's fear mongering. It's not fear mongering. It's just saying that, hey, budget policy has always been that we always try to keep the property tax rate what it was in the prior year. And what we've always done in our budget, as you've noted, as you can note from the charts, is that from 2011, our budget was 78 million, and in 2021 our budget was 105 million. which is basically an increase of 35.57%. So we have been increasing spending. We just have not been increasing the tax rate. And so, and basically, we've been making that up through other sources. Equalized assessed value has been part of that, and spending down the unencumbered fund balance has been part of that. So I don't think the suggestion should be that the county board doesn't spend money. The county board in the past 10 years has increased its budget almost 20, what is that, 30 to 22, 27, $27 million over the last 10 years. So, and we've done that basically without having to have any significant tax increase over those 10 years. So we've been able to keep up with increased needs, and we're always going to have priorities. I mean, that doesn't stop at the end of this meeting. We're always going to have priorities, but I think one of the priorities should also be the taxpayer.
Member Tom or Vice Chair Thompson.
Yeah, two concerns. I'm going to probably be voting, not probably will be voting against. I think the statement B has done well. I would agree that it's done well over the years. I like that statement as well. I do not agree that it somehow stifles staff or department heads' ability to bring forth new ideas. I made this comment earlier, last meeting. That's a culture we have to set, and they have to understand that we are willing to look at that stuff. And if it gets to the point where we have to do something different, we can still do that. But I think leaving that in there as our goal to staying close to where we were, I think that's important. Number two, going down into the where it says 12 to 15%, as I stated earlier in the meeting, I think that needs to be tied to instead of just a general statement, but tied to the recommendation by the auditors or whoever it is that says this is what it should be and this is why, and not just a general. We want 12 to 15%. I think that would bring more clarity and understanding to it as we go through the process, not only for the day, but for future boards and finance committees that look at this going forward. So I would like to see those two changes going back to leaving B and some more clarity on the 12 to 15%. Thank you.
Member Woolrab.
Thank you. I guess I would like to push back on that concept that we've necessarily been in a great, we don't want to raise taxes. Let me start there. But we have also, I think, ended up where we're spending money repairing things and buying new things when things could have been kept up in the first place had we had the money to do it. And because somehow we got there. I don't know exactly how, what all the ins and outs of that are, but somehow what we see in property committee is there are many, many things, and some of them very big ticket items that are now in disrepair because we haven't spent the money to take care of them. And so I'm pushing back on the concept that what we've done in the past is going to keep working for us, because I don't think it's worked great in the past. So I would be in favor of those changes that are outlined by administration.
I do have a question related to this, and that our general fund rate is virtually maxed out right now. So if we would raise the general fund rate, the county rate, where would that additional come from? Because it's not going to go to the general fund, right? I mean, so that has to stay flat because it can't go up. So our county rate, though, can go up because there are insurance, obviously. I mean, that's a fund that doesn't have doesn't have a cap on it. I think IMRF doesn't have a cap on it. I'm just thinking of the things from a township. So I'm guessing it's the same for Social Security doesn't have a max rate, and neither did auditing, like the cost for auditing. Those are the few that I'm familiar with that don't have that. But a general fund has a cap, and we're capped at it. So where do we see those other things? I mean, am I correct in what I'm saying is that it has to come from someplace else? And, because it's not going to come from a general fund tax rate.
Yes, so there would be we would have the ability to do a little bit of movement in the general fund tax rate to a 0.25. In 2020 was the only year that we had it at the max of 0.25. Now granted, that's only, you know, maybe $20,000. I don't know what it would be off the top of my head, but that would allow that in the general fund, which is always an area where we're scrambling to make cuts. But you are right. There are other tax levies that do not have the same cap that we are at, and we would be able to adjust those as a whole, which might slightly increase our tax rate.
So what we've done in the past then is decrease the general fund rate to make up for those things that don't have a cap. Is that what we were doing all along?
We were reducing the general fund tax rate to keep the overall tax rate the same. Yes. At least that's what we did last year. I can't speak to previous years.
Okay. Member Erickson.
Just a respectful counter to Member Woolrab, and I say this respectfully. I mean, she would know that through the past 10 years, we've also taken on new additional expenses, such as a new jail. We did a mental health initiative. We've done some other things that takes money from the budget too. And if you're going to choose to do those things, then you've got to make a priority. Are you going to spend it on buildings? You're going to spend it on a mental health initiative. You're not. So we have been spending money. Our priorities have been different, and maybe the next 10 years we'll spend more of a priority now that we have a new jail. And now that we have a mental health services, that now we can spend the next 10 years maybe more prioritizing building. But the buildings haven't been the priority in the last 10 years. We'd added to mental health services because we thought that was a priority at the time, and we thought we had to have a new jail. And so, it's just a matter of trying to balance out priorities. It's not necessarily a matter of stinginess.
By taking out that phrase, because it only says shall make every effort, how will that impact the budget? You take that literally, it cannot, or do you take it for what it says, make every effort?
I believe that we take it as it says, where we shall make every effort. That doesn't hold us either way.
So does, I want to go back to our council on the corner, please. You were saying that we should look at each piece first?
So, what I can say about that is each levy that we have has authority under the statute. And it's much more complicated than raising the fees in the clerk's office. Let me just put it that way. Because as Member Friedrich pointed out, it could affect our bond rate, and our bond rate could affect the current bonds that we have when those were issued, however many years ago. They were issued with representations of our financial health, and obviously they were projections. So if we start adjusting that, all I'm saying is that it would take a very deep dive that no one in the county at this point in time is has the expertise to do. We hire that out, and so as do most counties, and it may not give you the um, result you're looking for. Is what I'm trying to say. So if once we open that door and start making adjustments, it's going to be a very in-depth conversation. Not to say we can't have that, but we just have to do the research ahead of time to know exactly how it affects everything because everything is intertwined. And so keeping it at that same rate that we've had, we haven't had to go down that path or ask those questions. But if you wanted to take that out and explore that, that would be something we would need to look into quite in depth.
Member Barnett.
Um, I, I would like to make a motion to amend this proposal to leave 2.1B in here and not strike it out of the text.
Do we have a second? No surprise. Member Erickson, very good, thank you. So we have a second. Discussion. All right, let's have a vote on retaining 2.1B in the budget resolution. Ms. Warlock, please. And chair will vote.
Thank you, ma'am. Member Barnett,
Yes.
Member Friedrich,
Yes.
Member Lehman,
No.
Member Thompson,
Yes.
Member Erickson,
Yes.
Member Woolrab,
No.
Chairman Metzger.
Yes.
Passes 5-2.
So that will be retained. Let's move on to 2.5, and that's the federal funding through the American Rescue Act 2021. This was added, this entire section, I believe. And I don't know if additional explanation is needed, but do we need an additional explanation, or why don't we just, you want to add something, Ms. Taylor?
So when we were adding this section to the budget policy, we identified that these funds would need to be encumbered by December 31st of 2024. And so we made the A and B are both general statements. They do not speak to the priorities that we will establish, just that we will establish identified priorities. And so that leaves us the flexibility if for some reason the American Rescue Plan fund would be less than we anticipated. We still have the flexibility in this budget policy. If the priorities would change, we still have flexibility. And so that is why it was written in the manner that it was written.
Questions or comments? Member Barnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 2.5B, it says recommendations are going to be made to the county board. And I guess I just wanted to ask staff, is that term being used generically or like, or will it literally come to the full board, or are you going to bring those recommendations through the committee structure?
Those will go through the committee structure as projects are identified.
Okay.
So why don't we vote on that piece? Retaining it the way, or the inclusion of that into this resolution. So or excuse me, Ms. Morlock, can we please have a vote and Chair will vote?
Point of order, Madam
Yes.
Chair. Originally I had made a motion to approve the entire document as is, and I believe it was seconded. So
Okay, so there is no amendment, so we won't need to do that. Good point. Thank you very much. We did have a concern or a comment from Vice Chair Thompson, I believe, related to the 12 to 15%. His recommendation was to put some verbiage related to, I believe it was the treasurer's, the GFOA recommendation, potentially that range. So if you want to speak to that, and maybe member or Vice Chair Thompson may want to speak to that.
So the 12 to 15% was a recommendation that was made from conversations with Michelle Anderson and looking at the GFOA. In our most recent conversation with Michelle, she identified that the newest GFOA recommendations are to have 2 months of operating expenses. And so I offer that to you, possibly as substitute language, but just to let you know and to specifically let Member Thompson know that that is in consultation with GFO standards as we received from Michelle Anderson, auditor.
Member Thompson.
Yeah, that would be great. And that's, again, I'm just trying to bring clarity as people look at this in the future. Where'd they get the 12 to 15%? Well, it's because what you just said, and I think that would help do just that. And so I would be in favor of, whatever, I'm not a wordsmith, so however you want to tie that, I think to the, not so much to the auditor, but to the larger GFAO standard, the accounting standards would probably be my recommendation. And
So let me just see if we can, and this is starting in the middle after, the county board shall make every effort to maintain the corporate general fund an unencumbered fund balance equal to 12 or 15%, supporting the GFOA standards. Is that what we're thinking? Based on recommendation, the GFOA recommendation, is that where we're at?
Yes, but would it fit at the end of the sentence?
I think it would fit better at the end as I started reading it. So the 12 to 15% of the county's total combined annual budget as recommended by the GFOA standards. Oh, I didn't get to page 10. Oh, so it would be, excuse me, 12 to 15% of the county's total combined annual budget and appropriation ordinance as recommended by the GFOA standards. So are you making that motion, Member Thompson? Or Vice Chair Thompson?
yes, I'll move the language you just said.
Okay, very good. And Ms. Morlock, do you have that?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Very good. Do we have a second? We have a second from Member Woolrab. And so additional discussion? We shall vote. Ms. Morlock. Mike?
I think I don't. Okay. This is the amendment to 3.1. Member Barnett,
yes.
Member Friedrich,
Yes.
Member Lehman,
Yes.
Member Thompson,
Yes.
Member Erickson,
yes,
Member Woolrab,
Yes.
Chairman Metzger.
Yes. Amendment passes. So there don't appear to be any other changes within the document. So does anybody have any other changes or any areas that they want to address before we vote on the amended resolution? Seeing none, we are now going to vote on the amended resolution, which really only changes what this last amendment that was passed at the recommendation of Vice Chair Thompson. And adding 2.5A and B to the document. Thank you. And Ms. Morlock, we are ready to vote, I believe.
Member Barnett,
Yes.
Member Friedrich,
Yes.
Member Lehman,
Yes.
Member Thompson,
Yes.
Member Erickson,
Yes.
Member Woolrab,
Yes.
Chairman Metzger.
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
And it passes unanimously, so that moves us to 4A2, other items to be presented. Does anybody have anything else to bring forward? All right. Yes, Member Erickson.
You have to educate me here on process. Now that we did this at this meeting, does this go for the county board now, or what? Did we pass it already? Or what are we, what
have
is
an
the process
I
here?
think we have an amended
Okay,
resolution that's going to have to be approved by the county board. Is that not correct? I think that's what we
Okay.
were,
thank you.
okay. So, and that will that be on consent? No?
The original resolution went to executive and to the board as an action item, ma'am.
Oh, it'll continue to be an action item. Okay, very good.
It'll be the same process as last.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any bills. Are there any other business or communication? I believe there was something on page 17 and 18. Oh, that was Member Erickson's, and we have addressed all of those. So do you have anything to add to that, Member Erickson?
Oh, I have another question though. Don't say please, you never know what I'm gonna ask. Mask ordinance, our mask thing. I mean, are we allowed to, can we come into this building and not wear a mask, or do we have to wear a mask, or what is the rule now?
We have never passed a mask ordinance. We have always chosen to follow executive orders from the governor, for example, in combination with the scientific advice from the CDC and the Illinois Department of Public Health. So here is what I've told department heads. We obviously can't look each other in the eye and get a verification of completion of vaccine, right? So in all, there could be immunocompromised people in this world that still choose to wear a mask. Um, and so we all have to go either on an honor system or at the comfort level of those that you are meeting with. But there has never been a mask mandate in this building. Um, or I'm not trying to correct you, Member Erickson, at all, but I do take this moment to provide clarity, especially even for staff who have been asking of the same questions. Um, and so in all, we're so appreciative of everyone who has been vaccinated. There are still opportunities to get vaccinated. There is still community spread. So that is the other thing that I told department heads. We are still not completely 100% free of COVID in our community. So we do encourage you or your friends and family, if you haven't been vaccinated, to take advantage of our clinics in here when we are together. If we are all in agreement, as I know we all are because we interact with each other, and I understand that you've been vaccinated, and I trust that you're telling me the truth, that you've been vaccinated, and you believe me that I've been vaccinated, we won't wear our masks, but in general, we'll have them at the ready. I have mine around my neck all of the time so that I can put it on and make someone feel safe and comfortable who maybe doesn't know me and might not trust my spontaneous utterance that, yes, I've received 2 Moderna vaccines. So thank you for asking that. You should feel confident to walk through the government center and other buildings. I'll say though that if you would go on a tour of our detention facility, or if for some reason you'd stop by and visit the nursing home, you might likely be asked to wear a mask. Congregate living settings have different requirements. Thank you. As does the Supreme Court, and Ms. Taylor is the authority on all that it takes to understand all of their rules, which we highly respect. So thank you for this opportunity.
Very good. Thank you for that clarity. And seeing no other business or communication, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, for your contribution.